apartment here with Glen Lamb. He's a World War II veteran, born August the 12th, 1920 in Harrington, Kansas. So he's like 83 years old this year. I'm Dean Schoengert. I will be the interviewer. I'm the coordinator of this oral history project in our county. So, how was it that you entered the service?
Well, I was drafted.
What were you doing before you were drafted?
I was on a ranch at Medicine Lodge. Ranch.
So you were a cowboy at early age.
Right.
Did you grow up on a ranch or a farm?
Yes.
And did you expect to be drafted, or was that a surprise?
Oh, yes.
What was the first thing that happened?
Well, we went to Camp Campbell, Kentucky, and started the 12th Armored Division. And from there on, I took our basic training there and started the 12th Armored Division there. And then from there,
So did you have tanks there to train
yes,
in?
And from there I went on then to tank mechanic school at Fort Knox. Then got out of there and come back to Camp Campbell. And then from there, we went on the Tennessee maneuvers down in southern Tennessee. And when that was over, then they sent us to South Carolina, Fort Jackson, to be in a separate tank battalion. And then they shipped us from there to Camp Barkley, Texas. And then from there, we went overseas.
Were you training in the same tank all this time?
Right, different tanks, but
Oh.
I mean, we trained there and went across the pond to England.
So you were supposed to be like a field mechanic for
I was a tank driver.
tank driver.
I drove a tank from the shores of France clear to Austria in the Bremen Pass when the war ended. A lot of miles. Hard ones.
What tank was this?
That was the M4A3 medium tank.
Medium tank. Mm-hmm. Do you have a picture of that?
This is a new type of tank, but we got that after the war was over. Can you take it there or do I shake too bad?
That's okay. And that's you there driving the tank?
Right.
Okay.
We just got that new tank after the war. I think it was the first day we had it.
I didn't understand. You got the new tank after.
Yes, I mean, there was a new model that come out, so I got one, but the war was already over. But my old tank, I took it the whole distance.
My goodness. What was the crossing difficult?
Yeah, very difficult.
Long time and rough?
Well, when we crossed the first part of the war, we went up the main river and come in behind the Germans right there, but they was along the Siegfried line, and we come in, Maginot line, I mean, and we come in and kind of cut them off there. That's where we embarked on being behind them. And then it was tough going for a long time. And we was in the 7th Army, and then we'd go back to Patton's Army, the 3rd Army, just back and forth. And then we got stuck with cleaning out that roller pocket, they call it there, this side of the Rhine River. That was tough.
That was a kind of industrial area the Germans were trying to protect.
And then, I don't know, we went into a town there, Herlesheim, France. kind of there in Alsace-Lorraine. And we lost our whole damn near our whole division. We had, well, of our company, we was a company of tanks that went into town. We lost, let's see, 8 tanks that day. We come out that night, we had 10 tanks, 13 infantrymen, and 2 medics. That was all that was left.
How many?
That's our 12th Armored Burial Ground there at Herdesheim, France.
Really?
All them tanks later date that got blew up, they turned them upside down on their turret, painted them white, and that's where this, they say it's the most beautiful cemetery over there. The people that's went back and seen it.
Oh.
So we got bloodthirsty after that.
You were like you lost like 50% of your,
Oh, more than that.
more than that, people and tanks. Huh?
And we, after that, we got kind of bloodthirsty, you know. And then when they wanted somebody to cross the Rhine River on the pontoon bridge, we went across, and they called us then the Mystery Division. They didn't know who we were, nobody. And we made 1,990 miles in 39 days.
Oh.
That's a going.
Why?
And we was, our outfit was, according to the German history, the most feared tank battalion over there. After we lost all them men, we got bloodthirsty.
You got mad, in other words.
Yeah, we was angry.
But your tank was kind of a light tank. I thought the Germans had their, did you
We
run up
could
against any Tigers or?
Oh, yeah. Last battle we had, we got 5 with our tank.
Your tank alone?
No how. Yeah, I mean, I had gotten a ballistic expert for a replacement for a tank commander, and he was good. He knew all about that gun and how it would perform. And then we had a strategy that I'd learned by being a mechanic that all these German tanks leaked fuel. Now, a lot of people didn't believe us, but we would use white phosphorus called a WP first round, and get that up on that tank, and it just exploded from that gas that was seeping. And we got 5 that last day. A lot of people went the other way around. But he knew his business.
What kind of range are you talking about that you could shoot that?
Oh, they'd be a mile away. A lot of them, sometimes we was looking them in the eye too. But I had my tank doctored up by being a mechanic. It had outperformed most of them. And I could get around and get behind them while the others were, I'd get around and we'd shoot them in the rear end while I'd pot shot them. It took a lot of, you had to be pretty well up on what you's doing to do it, but you could knock them out.
That was the Germans' best tank, wasn't it?
Yes.
And it'd be a lot bigger, heavier than this.
Well, they had such much armament on them, and then they had a 88, which was a hell of a gun. But the American could outsmart them.
Did we ever have a gun that was comparable to the 88?
No. They got a 76, but it still wasn't up to the 88.
I've heard many veterans talk about the German 88.
They're wicked.
The noise that they would make. And
The worst thing that they had was a screaming Mimi. That night after we'd lost almost our division at Hurlesheim, then the next night we had a counterattack from them. And they was using them things, you know, for harassment. But we took care of them. They sent the 36th Infantry Division up there, and between the two of us, we got the job done.
Did you get replacements after you lost over 50%?
Yes, we went back and got replacements and then went on from there.
Were these new, inexperienced
Most
people?
of them college boys.
So you had to train them to...
Trained them the hard way.
Mm-hmm.
I've had them tell me, just shut up, don't explain nothing to us, we know more than you do, that type. So you cock your Tommy gun and stick it in their belly. Now I tell them to pay attention and they would listen.
Is that what you carried as a personal weapon?
Yes. The grease gun, they called
It wasn't much good though, was it?
it. Yep, for close fighting.
Close fighting, it was all right. How many men did you have in your tank?
5. We had a tank commander and a gunner and a loader, and then the driver and assistant driver. And he was also a bow gunner that had he shot kind of like shooting from the hip on a swivel in the front.
Oh.
That old tank could talk and tell you a lot of stories.
Did you notice your head was sticking out there?
Well, you could
close
lower
that
it like a barber chair up and down.
Oh.
It was spring loaded. You drop down when you was fighting and shut your lid because the gun shot right over your head, machine gun. But I always wanted to stick my head out if I could.
You couldn't see too well?
Well, we had periscopes. They were hard to drive with a periscope in one hand and shifting gears and steering all at the same motion. They would go up about 6 inches.
What do you do to drive a tank? You have a steering wheel and foot pedals?
No, they're hand
handles?
clutches.
Clutches, huh?
They come from the floor clear up. And then they was 5-speed manual transmissions. You had to drive a tank like it belonged to a finance company. They just pedaled to the metal, because they weighed 34 tons.
Was the accelerator a foot feed or
Well,
was
these
it a
have
hand lever?
the what now?
The accelerator
On your foot,
on your foot like a car.
right.
Brakes were...
You had a hand accelerator if you wanted to use it, but they had a regular throttle on the floor and the clutch. And your steering levers were your brakes.
What was your top speed?
Well, if you cheated like I did, 40 mile an hour. I had first day I got it in England when we got our tanks. I worked on it that night under the cover of darkness. I knew how to do it. I made it idled on one carburetor and I believe it was 800 RPMs that picked up the second. Well, I adjusted them where they idled on 2. And then when you punched it, you had more giddy up and go. And then I screwed the governor wide open and camouflaged that and I could go. But I knew enough not to gut it all the time. I let it only in emergency. Never was stuck in France, and that's brag.
Never got stuck.
Well,
What
most
about
people did.
What about the hedgerows and the...
Well, I didn't get stuck. I had enough extra momentum I could take it through. That's one thing I could do. I could drive one of them tanks.
That's amazing. You had no experience on a bulldozer or anything like that before?
Oh yeah, on the farm, machinery and stuff. I drove one about 2 blocks and they made me a tank instructor because I knew how to, make them work. But there was all kinds of people from all over, you know. Some of them had never drove a bicycle. And they didn't make very good tank drivers. Are we running out of rope there?
Did you decide where to drive the tank, or?
Right. That was my part of it.
Well,
The tank commander, you know, we had formations and different things we fought in, but the tank driver's deal to get the gun in position and get the tank, you know, cross ditches and up hills
But
and get proper cover so you don't get your turret blew off your tank.
so you were looking out for that all the time. to
Right.
give your gunner the best possibility.
Well, that's
Would you-
right, and
Your commander would pick the target, would he?
yes,
How did you communicate with each other?
had radios,
Oh, yeah,
intercom in the,
so you could talk to all 5 men?
right. They had, you know, you all had your headset and your mic. Most of the time we had a throat mic that went around, button right around your throat. Some of them had lip mics, but they weren't no good. Now, back when we was in Herlisheim, France, I wanted to tell you a little story that happened there. There was a tank ahead of me in town. We was in there, we was all trapped. And they got a hit on them, only it just was their tarp burning, so they bailed out and abandoned their tank and left it running. Well, pretty soon I seen that tank leaping. And a German had slipped up there and got in that tank and was gonna steal it. And I told the tank commander that that wasn't an American driver, and he argued, and finally we just shot him in the rear end, our own tank, you know. And it was a German, he bailed out and we shot him. But the funny part was the tank commander got the Bronze Star. He was again the action. That's some good old days, isn't it? But we had a lot of funny moments and a lot of
Did you have trouble keeping up with fuel and ammunition?
well, on the breakthrough, when we led the breakthrough across the Rhine River, our orders was taking the landing strip every evening so they could fly us gas and ammunition. But when we
Take,
got into Germany,
take a landing strip,
Mhm.
find a landing strip, and then
take it,
protect us.
secure it so they could bring in, fly us gas.
I see.
But when we got in the breakthrough, once we got into Germany, they didn't want to fight.
Hmm.
They'd surrender by the hundreds of thousands, but we'd go through towns wide open at night, and then maybe the next day somebody in the rear would have to fight, but we went right on through them. Made us mad we couldn't blow up their country.
Your objective was just to go as far as you
Far
could?
as we can. And we was in the Bremen Pass in Austria, going down into Italy when the war ended. That was a hell of a jaunt.
I would think you would be in danger of getting cut off and surrounded and
Well,
everything else.
we have been in that predicament. We could fight our way out of it.
As long as you could get ammo and gasoline, I guess.
One night we had one battle. That's when dear General Patton sent us up across the main river with 5 tanks to make the Germans think the whole outfit was coming that way. And we sacrificed him 5 tanks, but we fooled him. 2 of us come back. Me and my gunner was the only 2 that come back, but we made it.
You really got hit pretty hard that time.
Well, they crossed the river, only they were smart. They left a bunch dug in to get us when we got there. You know, delay in action.
Mm-hmm.
They was waiting. When we got done, didn't have no more ammunition, only 45 for Tommy guns, that was all. But we whipped them.
You came back across the bridge then?
Next morning we come,
Wow.
that old tank of mine been in some pretty good places.
You have a name for it?
Let's see what the sergeant put a name on it, Coming Home. And the gun, we had Peacemaker on the barrel of the gun. We give them some better names than that, but we was censored, we couldn't use that.
Man. Well, what, you drove that tank for how many months?
Day and night. Now, when we went in combat, we had the clothes on our body, what we wore. And it'd be, well, I'm gonna say 6 months minimum before you even got to take a bath, you know. And then it was in your steel helmet. Them clothes got so dirty, the 5 men in the tank, you know what that smelled like. It was pretty rank.
What do you do about urinating and
You use your steel helmet or a shell casing, dump it out.
what you do?
And your commode is your steel helmet. But war was hell, I guess, but we got by. Worst thing was the frozen rations, you know, and you didn't have no water, it was all frozen in the winter time.
You carried those on the back of the tank or something? Or?
Well, it was on back of the tank, the 5-gallon can was, and it'd freeze. That was for your radiator. You'd go days without a drink of water. Them old frozen sea rations.
Did you have mealtime, or you just everybody ate when they could?
Well, we had 3 cans a day, different. Them little old teeny like even what this like.
Yeah.
They'd be froze like a rock most of the time in the winter time. Then when the war went on a little longer, they finally got a K ration, like a Cracker Jack box. And then they got some more varieties of sea rations.
Which did you like the best?
I like the skillet and steal some eggs and potatoes. We did that at last too.
Did you have to sleep in your tank, or?
Sleep just like I'm sitting right here. Well, now and then you might be calm enough you can get out, but most of the time you sit right where you was when you shut it off. And when you're running the tank, it'd be hot in there, all that oil. And then at night, you know, you was sweaty when you was sitting there, your socks, and then they'd freeze on your feet at night. It wasn't the best place, but we made it work.
Is it a diesel engine?
No, it was a Ford V8, 500 horsepower.
Really?
It was a good engine. But they wanted to keep them all on the same fuel, you know. They did have some diesels, but it wasn't practical. They had most of them was all V8 Fords, most of them. They did have some old air-cooled Wright Whirlwinds or Continentals, but they wasn't worth it. They was made for desert fighting.
How did you get your tank started in that cold weather?
No, there was no problem. They had 2 mags. And then you did have a primer on them if you needed them. Mine fire every time. Main thing is clean your tracks out at night, make sure they're not full of mud. A lot of people didn't do that, and then they wondered why they got their tank blew out from under them. And another thing that we did in our tank, we kept it full of fuel. I wanted that tank full of fuel whenever it was available. And that's what we did, and we come home with our tank. A lot of them are laying over there somewhere along the road or buried in a big hole because they're too lazy to fill them up.
Less likely to explode that way?
The what?
Less likely to explode?
No, you just didn't get stranded.
I see.
When you want to retreat, you want some fuel, or you know.
Whenever you
But
do.
a lot of people got lazy, and that's the reason they're still laying over there in Germany. That's no.
It's the little things that count.
This, a tank is a team. It's a 5-man team. Each guy looks, it covers his area. And if you got one man that goes to sleep, that's usually where you got hit. I had a lot of buddies that's the way they got it, because they got replacements. And they never schooled them, you know what I mean? And one boy got sitting there reading a comic book, and the tank got hit. 3 of them was killed in that tank just over that boy not doing what he's supposed to. But there is one thing I remember. You know, you hear people say there never was a Holocaust, you know, and well, we liberated that Dachau prison camp in Germany. And I can tell you, I can verify that. That was the worst horrible day I ever spent. See them people with their legs about like a broom handle and starved to death. See them lined up, bodies be incinerated to make fertilizer out of. And the odor in that camp of all that death make a big boy sick.
Any survivors or?
Yes, they were survivors. And the only thing, I offered them food, and all they wanted was a gun. And we had some German guns we give to them, and they headed up through the timber, following the ones that the Germans had run when we come there, you know. That's what they were after.
Is that Poland? Dachau?
No, that was in Germany.
In Germany?
Dachau prison camp. And there'd be piles of eyeglasses stacked up, piles. When they you know, did away with them, they saved their glasses. Then there'd be piles where they'd knocked their teeth out to get the little gold inlays, and there were piles of teeth laying there. That's how you call them, I call them heathens is what I call them, I guess. And you know this deal with Saddam Hussein, if they let him go, he'd be second Hitler. But I could go on for days, but that's about
Well,
basically it.
we got about 1 minute. Would you like, when you came back, what did you do then?
I went back to the ranching,
Did you? I s-
then from there to construction.
Oh. Did you have a hard time getting over your war experience?
Never have. You wake up at night now and then and you can still see it. When we went into Hertesheim, the body of 100 men was laying right in the road, and I had to drive over them to get in there. That's bothered me ever since.
These were,
Your own infantry,
they were dead there lying.
they was laying there. They promised me, the CO said, go on, they're dead. I said, put it in writing. But you had to drive over them to get in. Hell of an experience. But there was a lot of them like that, I mean, a lot of them.
Well, thank you, Mr. Lamb.
Glad to do it
It's
for you.
a graphic story of a tanker that I don't think we've heard yet.